Hello, Cornerstone Church. Pastor Phil here, coming to you on day 19 of our 21-day study in the Gospel of John. We are moving steadily further on and nearing the end. It's quite fitting that we deal with the events of chapter 19 today, because today is Good Friday. And so as we commemorate the crucifixion of Jesus, we read in this section of Scripture the passages that deal with the crucifixion of Jesus. Now, I want to begin in verse 1, and there's something that really, again, it's kind of interesting. It's amazing how deep the Bible is. And two times now in the last couple of days, as I've read, there were things that hit me that didn't hit me before, like yesterday when we looked at the cup and what Jesus says about, shall I not drink the cup, and the connection to his prayer in Gethsemane when he prays that the cup would be taken from him. Well, today as I was reading in chapter 19, it says this in chapter 19, "Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, 'Hail, King of the Jews!' And they struck him in the face." Now, it's amazing how much is involved in that one paragraph of Scripture, because there are several things mentioned there: the flogging, the crown of thorns, and the punching in the face. These are amazingly intense things that are happening to Jesus. The flogging was essentially a whipping with a cat o' nine tails that had bone and pieces of metal and other things that were attached to it that literally ripped the flesh from your body. So in that one expression, Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged, John just blows right past that. But it involved an incredible torture that Jesus was subject to. Just that one sentence. Then it says they took a crown of thorns and put it on his head. Again, the thorns that they used to make this crown of thorn were huge thorns. They weren't just like little rose thorns that you think about. And you know, it's a kind of interesting. Recently, I had a situation where I had to deal with a little thorn bush, and it just had these little prickly things on them. They weren't even big thorns; they were just little tiny thorns. But still, it like almost ripped my clothes apart. It was really kind of amazing. And these were huge thorns that Jesus had to deal with. And again, John just passes over it. So that was also incredibly painful. It would have brought great torment to him. And I mean, you think about your head is very sensitive. And to have these spikes basically stuck into your head. And then it says they put a purple robe on him and began to hail him as King of the Jews. The emotional turmoil of that being mocked for who you are in God. And then it says they struck him in the face. So they would pretend to worship him and then smack him in the face or punch him in the face. Again, just terrible tortures that Jesus had to go through. And John just blows past them. But the point that really hit me, that's never hit me before. So that's the first paragraph. And then verse 4 starts the second paragraph, and it says this: "Once more Pilate came out and said to the Jews, 'Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know I find no basis for a charge against him.'" What? You just had him flogged. They just put a crown of thorns on his head. They just mocked him and punched him in the face. And now you come out and you say you find no basis for a charge. In other words, Pilate is saying, I know he's innocent and I want to let him go. But look at all that they've done to him already. All that they've done to him, and Pilate knows he's innocent. This is incredible to me. That never really hit me before. How much they did to Jesus before Pilate even makes that declaration, knowing full well that he's innocent. Still, in an attempt to try and appease the Jews, he tortures this man basically to almost within an inch of his life, just to appease the Jews. So that's the first thing. Then as you read further down, the Jews shout, "Crucify him, crucify him." But they say, we have a law we can't crucify him, but he must die because he claimed to be the Son of God. In verse 6, it says, when Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid. He went back inside the palace. Where do you come from? He asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. Do you refuse to speak to me? Pilate said. Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you? And then Jesus says this in verse 11. Jesus answered, you would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. What an amazing passage. What an amazing statement. Jesus is standing before the most powerful man in that region at that time, the man who does literally have the power of life and death over him. And Jesus says to him, you're nothing. You are nothing. You would have no power at all if it were not God's will. If it were not God's will for me to die, then you would have no power over me. You wouldn't be able to do a thing. Just like so many times before the Jews tried to kill me and they couldn't, because it wasn't my time and it wasn't God's will at that time. So just the calmness of Jesus and the self-assuredness to be able to say in that moment when his life hangs in the balance, you have no power over me. And then the next passage I want to point out is down further in verse 15. The crowd shouts out, take him away, crucify him. And Pilate says, shall I crucify your king? And they say, we have no king but Caesar. The chief priests answered. That passage has always stuck out to me. All right. The Jews hated the Romans. The Jews hated the fact that they were under Roman rule. And yet, in their hatred of Jesus, they actually say to Pilate, we have no king but Caesar. They acknowledge Caesar as their king, something that they hated and they would be loath to do because of their hatred of Jesus. And again, it's amazing when you reject Jesus in your life, you could be drawn to so many other things. You could be drawn to some very evil things because of your rejection of Jesus. And so, you got to be very careful about this. Rejecting Jesus opens people up to all manner of evil and demonic activity. And that's what we see in their lives. The next thing I want to point out is it says in the next verses, the soldiers took charge of Jesus. They took him out to the place. But then in verse 19, Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened to the cross. It read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Now, that was not done because Pilate believed that Jesus was the King of the Jews. I don't know what Pilate believed, but if you remember earlier, yesterday we saw him say, what is truth? He certainly comes at it from the perspective that truth is relative, and I don't know that he accepted Jesus as the truth. But he wrote that to mock the Jews. He wrote that to stick it to the Jews. He resented what it was they were making him do. Pilate knew that Jesus was innocent. And I think it's Matthew's gospel where Pilate's wife says to him, don't have anything to do with this innocent man because I've suffered terribly in a dream today because of him. So Pilate knew he was innocent. Pilate didn't want to put him to death, but the Jews forced him to do it. They didn't give him any option. And so he sticks it to them in this moment by writing, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And the Jews say to him, the chief priests, it says in verse 21, the chief priests of the Jews protested to Pilate, do not write the King of the Jews, but that this man claimed to be King of the Jews. And then verse 22, Pilate answered, what I have written, I have written. Now what's interesting about that is Pilate is not saying something that he believes. Pilate is saying something that he thinks will rile up the Jews, and he's doing it to stick it to them. And yet, even from this carnal perspective where his motives are completely wrong, he declares something that is true. He declares something about Jesus that is true. And in his death, he is hailed as King of the Jews because of Pilate's determination to try and stick it to the Jews. So even when people are set against God and doing things to hurt other people, they still could accidentally be speaking the truth in that moment. All right. The rest of the passage deals with his death, and the crucifixion and so on, please read that, and I pray that you would really meditate on that and be blessed in that. I just want to point out one last thing in the last section. 38 and following, it says, Joseph of Arimathea asked Pilate for the body of Jesus. Now Joseph was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly, because he feared the Jews. That's another thing that's always kind of stuck out to me. That Joseph was a disciple, but he was a secret disciple. And I think on some level, there's no such thing as a secret disciple. If you're a disciple, Jesus said, if you deny me before men, I will deny you before God. So we have to be careful about fear in our lives. And if we're a disciple of Jesus, we've got to be one openly, proudly, and boldly. So God bless you guys. Have a great day in Jesus. And hope to see you tonight or over the weekend. God bless.